I think we can all agree that compromise, or situations that call on us to compromise, come up all the time in every area of life. We engage with people and we want one thing, they want another thing, and we don't always see eye to eye. So we have to figure out how to navigate those kinds of situations. And many people think, and I think with good reason, that compromise is often a good thing, or it's really important. The world goes around and you need compromise to fuel it. Without it, nothing can get done. Well, one expression that you hear is, to get along, you need to go along. And here on the screen, I've just captured a couple of headlines that convey this view. There are a lot of articles on the web you can find suggesting how important compromise really is in life. It's a virtue, it's a guiding principle of social life. And there are tips on how to improve your personal relationships by becoming better at compromise, why it's so crucial. Now, I think up to this point, most of you probably are nodding and saying, yeah, we get that. No one's going to push against that. But then when you think on it for a little while, people start getting uneasy because it's not clear that every compromise is a good compromise or is a good thing to do. And people then start reeling it back and saying, well, okay, well, compromise is a good thing. It's a virtue. It's important in personal relationships and work and politics. We get that. But then there are lots of cases where it doesn't seem like it makes total sense to compromise. And you get people saying, well, hold on a second, you should never compromise. There's things, or just as a principle in life, you should not compromise. Now, this puts people in, I think, an understandable quandary, because it's, on the one hand, there are lots of cases where it makes sense to compromise and other cases where it doesn't. So if you ask people when or how should you figure this out, well, it's sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Or the answer is it depends. Well, there's lots of qualifications. And just to underline this issue, part of what makes it complicated and difficult is probably a lot of you have experienced situations where you've compromised on some issue, but later you think back on it, and maybe it's in a personal relationship, and you think, well, that really didn't go the way I thought it would. I'm not happy with the results. And more than that, I don't feel I was true to myself in an important, deep way. And you could see negative effects of that. And notice as well that as much as people talk about compromise as this virtue, that there's always situations where you should compromise, notice that the word also has really negative connotations in certain usages. So if people say, oh, he compromised himself, they don't mean he did the right thing in kind of finding common ground with someone. They mean he did something really bad. Or if you think you're going to fly to visit your family and you say, do you want to get on a plane that has a compromised inspection history, or its maintenance is being compromised in some way? So we get that there are crucial ways in which compromise means a bad thing. And so let's try to unpack that a little bit. So when should you compromise, or when shouldn't you compromise? And I indicated earlier that a lot of people's attitude is, well, it depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So that really doesn't answer the question, because an it depends is just a gate, and you need to walk through it and figure out, well, what's the next question? How do you know? So the question I want to push on is, well, how can you know when you should compromise? What does it depend on? What do you need to know in order to kind of navigate this kind of situation? When should you give in, and when should you stand your ground? That's what I want to sort of focus on in the next few minutes. And to do that and explore this issue, I'm drawing on an article that Ayn Rand wrote called "Doesn't Life Require Compromise?" And I'm putting on the screen a link to it on our website. You can go read it for free right after this webinar. Don't leave right now. Go do it later. And I really encourage you to go and read it. It's not that long, but it's really rich in philosophical insight. And what I'm going to suggest, building on some of the points in her article, is that if we take her analysis of compromise really seriously and kind of rethink it through, it helps us distinguish between the compromises that are good, that lead to win-win outcomes and positive relationships, and versus compromises or situations where it doesn't lead to that. It's really bad outcomes. Well, let's start with just what's a standard dictionary definition of compromise. And I looked this up the other day, and this is what I found. It's, quote, an agreement or settlement of a dispute reached by each side making concessions. So you're resolving some issue by each side giving some ground. Okay, that's just a description. It doesn't really guide you. It just tells you what we're talking about. But notice it doesn't, it includes both kinds of situations, both the kind of compromises where people think, yeah, this was a good outcome, and the ones where people resolve the disagreement, each side giving ground, but it turned out badly. So it includes both the good and the bad kind of things that we have in mind. So this is where I think Ayn Rand's insights on compromise really help. And I'm putting here one of the formulations she has in that article. She says, quote, "It is only in regard to concretes or particulars, implementing a mutually accepted basic principle, that one may compromise." So what I really want to get from this is that the crucial element I want to draw out is that there has to be a mutually agreed principle or shared value context. If I can formulate it slightly differently in my own words, there has to be some common ground that is meaningful and substantive. So it has to be shared value context or principle. Okay, let's just walk through a couple of simple examples and flesh this out. So you and a friend have been wanting to get together for coffee for a long time, and you both have very busy schedules, and you're trying to coordinate. So there's a lot of texts going back and forth. Can you make it Monday? Can you make it Tuesday? What time? And what you end up with is you can meet on Saturday morning, but there's a very small window. And she has a commitment in the afternoon. She has to drive off somewhere, and there's a very short window of time. And you have stuff right before that. So, you want to meet close to 11. That works for you. And she needs to meet close to 12. Okay. Well, so you can't have both of those times, and you really want to meet. So what do? Well, it turns out that 11:30, somewhere in the middle, actually works, and it's a win-win outcome. So you both so in a sense, you're compromising on the time you want to meet. You're not getting the exact time you want, but you're getting something that works for both of you. Now, and I'm sure this happens all the time. I mean, when I'm at work, when I'm scheduling meetings, there's always a back and forth, and you kind of find something that's mutually agreeable. But notice, just to take a step back from this situation and say, what is the common ground here? What's understood? What's the basic value context that's shared? And I think it's fairly straightforward, and it's usually unstated, but let's just make it explicit. It's that you and your friend each respect each other's time, and you value each other, and you recognize that you have other commitments beyond this coffee meet, and that you're not going to violate those and expect one person to completely throw their schedule into disarray and do something that is really not going to work for them. So it's a crucial element of this value context is that it's a true relationship of equals. They're actually friends and they value each other. Okay, simple example. You see how there has to be that context where we agree that we're going to meet at some point on Saturday, but the details, we can shift those around. Take another example. You want to buy a used car, and you have a budget. You want to spend around $6,000, and you find a car at the dealer, and it is $9,000, the sticker price. It's a good fit. It's what you want. And so you talk to the dealer and say, well, look, I want this car, but I have a very limited budget. What can you do for me? And you negotiate back and forth, and some people are better at this than others. You end up with, you're able to buy the car, but it's a little bit more than what you hope to spend. You end up paying about $7,700. And the dealer is getting less than what he asked for. The sticker price was $10,000. But you're both getting what you want out of this deal. It's a mutual benefit. You both recognize you're better off at the end of it. And notice here, and this happens all the time, of course, right? This is a very simple kind of case where there's a transaction involving money and a product or a good, in this case, the car. Now, again, stepping back, what's the common ground? What's the shared principle here? There's a number, but let's sort of isolate a really crucial one, which is the principle of trade, that you have to give value for value, and both sides have to agree voluntarily to be in part of this transaction. So they have to be part of it voluntarily, and they have to recognize that what they get is a value. And if they don't, they just walk away. There's no obligation to finish the transaction. He can wait for another buyer to come along. You can go to another dealer or just find another car. So crucial here is that there's a shared value context and a shared principle that you're both, and again, it's usually it's understood, or it's not really brought to the fore, but it's important to conceptualize it. Okay, but that's in contrast to situations where that is missing. Well, there's no value context, no shared principle, or put another way, as Ayn Rand puts it in her essay, there can be no compromise on basic principles or fundamental issues. No compromise on basic principles or fundamental issues. So you can compromise within a value context, but you can't compromise on the basic principle itself, or the basic issue. So let me dramatize that for you. So this is an example from a workplace. And imagine yourself a biology teacher, and your department head comes to you and says, you know, I've been trying to work out your request to get some microscopes for the classroom, and I can approve a few of them, but I need you to make a compromise with me. I need you to give some ground on something with the curriculum. I don't think the curriculum is sort of what you're teaching is as good as it could be. So what I need you to do is, when you get to the section on evolution, I want you to talk about evolution in a particular way, and I'll give you some notes on what that looks like. And I want you to talk about this idea that I think it has a lot of merit and it's scientific, so it belongs in the curriculum. It's called intelligent design, which means, basically it means that it's a conception of evolution where there's some kind of God-created origin. Now, whatever your views are on evolution, and I happen to think it's a well-established theory, in this story, you, the science teacher, happen to be really informed, you know, firsthand. It's your objective judgment, your rational conclusion that evolution is well-established, and that this intelligent design stuff that your colleague is trying to have you inject into the curriculum is nonsense. It's a fairy tale. It's fantasy. It's a religious view. It doesn't belong in a science curriculum. So you know that this is not true. You don't want this in your curriculum. You don't think it will improve the students' learning to have this injected into their classroom. But at the same time, you need these microscopes because that's part of what the classroom experiences. You can't really teach certain material that way. So she said, well, look, she summarizes this for you. We both give a little ground, and we both get something. You get the microscopes, and I get to see the curriculum improved, and the students get a better outcome. Now, what do you think of that? Is that a compromise that is within a shared principle? Or is it a compromise on the principle? I think if you think on it, it is a compromise on a principle. It's telling you, the science teacher who knows and believes evolution is right and true, she's saying to you, your colleague, no, you have to put aside your fundamental understanding of this truth and instead do what I'm asking you to do. And notice that there's kind of a superficial appearance that you're both gaining something. You're getting the microscopes and she's getting some conception of an improved curriculum. But the reality is that there's no common value context. She doesn't really respect your judgment or your integrity. And she's asking you to violate your intellectual integrity in this case. So this is a compromise on a principle, and it's wrong. It has no place in a successful life. It leads to really bad outcomes. So that's a kind of an example where that value context is missing, where it's a compromise on a principle. So just to summarize where we are so far, so the key point I want to draw out from Ayn Rand's essay here that I think is incredibly helpful in guiding our thinking and our action in life is that there's a big difference, a legitimate compromise, or a true or a genuine compromise, a valid one, a good outcome, a good compromise is one within a principle. It's within a shared value context, as opposed to what people describe as a compromise, but is not. It's a betrayal. It's a selling out. It's a compromise on a principle. And that's where we get sort of the negative connotation for this idea.